So everything that I kind of know about this actually starts because there was a little book I wrote called How to Go to College Almost for Free. And this book was actually launched in sort of like the dot-com bubble. It was kind of launched in a downturn. And specifically, I self-published 5,000 copies of this book. This was way before I had started any agencies and marketing agencies. And I was straight out of college. So I was like, 21, 22 years old. And we had to find a way to sort of generate traction and generate news and generate awareness, even though we were sort of in the midst of this downturn. So that was my first experience with this. Second, I was in a program called Startup Chile, and maybe some of you have heard about it, but it's one of these startup incubators around the world. In fact, it's a cool one because it's the only one that gives you money for your startup and doesn't ask for any equity and gives you a place to work and helps you with a place to live. And so I actually became the pitch trainer for Startup Chile and started coaching a lot of these companies specifically on how to grow even when market conditions weren't great. And then the final kind of part here, so we can get the heart of it, was that since then, we started a global agency network called TOP, and specifically PR Hacker, which is what I'm going to talk about in this presentation, and sort of the approach is all about sort of hacking growth, using PR and marketing to do it. And we've worked with a lot of companies from scrappy startups to big brands. Okay, so that's the 60-second version. Now, let's talk about 7 ways to grow your business in a downturn. And specifically, the first way, and one of the great opportunities that you have in a downturn, because it basically resets and reshuffles the deck, is to build credibility through social proof. And specifically, there are some ways to do it, and there's ways why credibility through social proof is actually easier in a downturn. And that's usually because all the players, all the market players, everything is totally being reset in that kind of moment in time. So first thing we're trying to do when we build credibility via social proof is we're trying to generate a high quality of media mentions at a regular cadence to show widespread reach. So one of the ways that we can generate social proof is just through quantity. Quantity is an opportunity in a market downturn because it's a whole new landscape. It's a different set of conditions. Usually people don't know what to do in terms of thought leadership, in terms of content. It's a new set of things. So it basically resets the playing field. And so there's an opportunity to get like sort of a high cadence of media mentions. Second thing that happens in terms of building credibility via social proof in a downturn is that there's ways to target top tier publications that offer prestige and a substantial halo effect to our brand. So everyone's kind of confused. Top tier media is trying to make sense of it, like the New York Times. And so there's actually an opportunity and a willingness to consider more types of experts, more types of companies. It diversifies the mix. If you have something important to say, then suddenly that's an option in a downturn, maybe when they wouldn't consider you otherwise. And then third, in terms of aligning social proof efforts to key industry verticals that match sales goals. So in a downturn, all of these industry verticals get disrupted. There's an opportunity there to kind of align what you're doing and sort of make headway there because people are looking for insights, thought leaders, expertise. And so one of the ways to kind of show you how this is done is I want to kind of show you blueprints that we use that are particularly effective in a downturn. We use them for crisis marketing. We're using them right now for 20 plus clients at the moment who are very, very active in establishing their brand presence in the current market. And let me give you a few examples of actual sort of headlines that sort of work. So the first blueprint is one that I love that I often start with called geo-ranking. And all of our blueprints, and these are sort of blueprints for generating social proof through media in a downturn, starts with a code name. In this case, it's geo-ranking. It has a central question. So the question here is, how can we compare different regions to each other to generate local news at global scale? And then it has a methodology about how to do it. And one of the reasons we like geo-ranking is that media is organized geographically. So in a downturn, there is like a crisis, like now, like the pandemic, there's less insight data that's like specific to a certain region or a certain city or a certain country. It's all new. So here's an example of how you use that in a headline. Here was something that we pitched and got to run the Boston Globe. Boston ranked number 4 in the world for venture capital funding of synthetic biology. So this is an example of sort of structuring a geographic pitch. This is like for Boston. We did this for like every major, kind of city that we wanted to target in the world. We structured a headline that was a local result, but we can scale this result all over. So ways that you can add geographic insights are one way that you can get media coverage that is geographic specific, and largely no one else is doing it because no one else has sort of adapted fast enough to the conditions in like the current pandemic. So for instance, I just got, I was doing, maybe, a dozen TV interviews in the last week, all related to having interesting job related news for certain markets that were just packaged for local markets, right? So that's kind of the first way that you can leverage these blueprints to generate social proof. Now here's a totally different blueprint. This is called bold ask. This is another one we use at PR Hacker. What bold question could we make that repositions our brand and makes us seem more noteworthy? So how do we actually ask a question that's so bold that just that question generates news? So anytime you can ask bold questions, when you've got a really disruptive black swan event like now, those bold questions can generate media exposure. Here's an example of something that we ran for Business Insider. Will this startup save 100 million lives by 2025? Right? That's a bold question. Why? Because if you look at okay, save a life. First of all, that's noteworthy. Like what how many startups can save lives, right? 100 million lives, wow, that's a big number. Okay, well, that's an interesting startup. Wow, by 25, not tomorrow, but not like a long ways away from now. This is really interesting. So you can generate, as we move towards social proof, by asking these bold questions is a way that you can kind of leverage. And again, these are all tactics for sort of resetting the playing field, suddenly making you more in the current crisis than maybe you otherwise would be by how you frame yourself. Brings us to third blueprint, number 3, holodata. So what relevant data can we supply to upcoming occasions, special events, or holidays to drive broader awareness and insight? Here's one that I love that we did for one of our clients that is an ed tech company. We did Red Eye Mommy for CNN. 52% of moms have stayed up late with their kids proofreading a paper. So we did this by doing a simple survey of users on this ed tech platform. We kind of got the result. We asked them a number of questions. We liked this one about staying up late. And here's the little secret for the holodata part. This was actually pitched during Mother's Day. So this was a whole new angle on another reason we can be thankful for mom, right? Like mom, was there for us, unconditional love, cooked us great food, took us to school. But oh, by the way, she was also staying up and reading our papers. At least some of the moms were doing that, right? So that became a new angle on a holiday that was interesting. So right now, because there are these moments and holidays is not just in the traditional sense of Mother's Day. It's also okay, certain cities or states are reopening, certain countries are having certain milestones. How do you create and use data that make you relevant to that? And these are all ways that basically you make yourself more important than just you would be maybe 3 months ago, before all of this sort of chaos and craziness started. Here's a fourth one, and this is a blueprint we call disease, and it's not, I don't mean that related to the actual, obviously very serious diseases right now that we're dealing with, but I actually mean it in the context of PR and how can we give a pressing problem a catchy and concrete name. We do a lot of work in the cybersecurity space. Here's an example from that we use for CNBC. Cyber attack unawareness disorder. 25% of tech companies don't know if they were breached, right? So in this case, what we're doing here is that we're giving a problem a catchy name. This is based on industry data that we had about just knowledge about breaches, but suddenly we're calling this cyber attack unawareness disorders. That's a way of giving a problem, a way that media can consume it, that we can then come in and solve. And then as we're doing this, one of our principles is that for each story idea, we often write 8 versions of these headlines. These aren't final. We A/B test which one performs the best. So the takeaway here is that you can generate social proof right now at a faster, accelerated rate, simply by creating headlines, stories, and ideas that are packaged for media in a way that is timely and relevant to what's going on right now. And so what would normally have taken you 3 years. You can do in 3 months if you're smart about that. And there's a number of factors of why that is. One, there's a thirst for information that can relate to the current situation. Two, less companies are doing it because they've been disrupted. Maybe their whole marketing department has been disrupted. And three, in times of uncertainty, there is great demand for certainty. And so if you can help provide it, and if you can provide certainty that is about the situation and about, for instance, cyber attacks and being unaware, and you can provide insight that gives us more certainty, that's valuable. And if you're valuable, then you will be able to kind of accelerate this process. And one of the key things that we do with our clients is that when you start getting this kind of social proof from third-party outlets, then you use this to announce this to your customer list. Like, hey, we were featured on Business Insider. Hey, check us out on CNN. And you do this at regular cadence so that one, those customers that were, close to maybe closing as a customer or a client or a consumer, they do that. But two, you use it to stay top of mind. And when the sort of basically the kind of crisis conditions abate and more people are doing business, you're the first call they make to do a deal or pursue an opportunity. Okay, so that's kind of the first way, right? The first way is this. Yes.
I'll interject for just a second here, because this is a point where it would make sense to actually field a question that was asked by Julie, right? He's thinking in particular about his business where previously they've been kind of focused on positioning their product as a cost reduction solution, because they feel that that's relevant to the current moment with the downturn. But they're looking for other areas where they're able to insert themselves into the conversation and kind of layer back to making themselves relevant in the current moment. So, and what they do for context, is they actually provide a software solution that allows you to run a data center remotely and scale easily. And their question is basically, what do businesses care about right now? Aside from just cutting costs, what are some of the other kind of messages that are noteworthy and can make them relevant in the moment?
Right. Okay. So a couple things. First, let's actually talk about cutting costs specifically, and then let's talk about sort of the premise of the question, which is other things. One of the big things for actually cutting costs, and this is this was universally true of like the past 4 recessions or economic downturns, is that smart companies that are the super performers, they cut costs in a smart way. And they cut costs by improving efficiency, scalability, systems, technology, rather than cutting costs by we're just going to chop off our entire department of people, or we're just not even going to use this this technology solution that could make us more efficient, but it adds an incremental cost up front. That's what they don't do. So I actually do think, to the question, that there's actually room to look at specifically messaging around cutting cost in a smarter way, becoming more efficient, becoming more scalable. It sounds like all the things that your solution sort of offers to create those efficiency gains. So that's kind of the first thing. The second thing, in terms of what are things that people care about right now that are really important, and this is again the super performers, I call them crisis conquerors, who do well. There's really 3 kind of core things they invest in. One is R&D. So this is a time to invest in R&D because this is the time where a lot of innovation happens. A lot of products are released that normally you wouldn't release. Why? Because the big players would squash you. But now you can release it because big players have kind of taken their eye off the ball. So R&D. So if you have a solution that can kind of message about how your research and development can improve, now's a good time. So doing something like switching over to a different scalable cloud provider, it's actually something that could be done now. 2 is assets. So specifically looking at what are the assets, because basically for companies, you can acquire capability and assets at maybe a less expensive rate for the long term right now. So that becomes a key factor. Third is marketing. And what marketing typically has to do is really 2 things. One, it has to orient towards more kind of immediate sales and performance. People are looking at that. So actually, if your solution can actually help more of a scalable, like for instance, a scalable system that will allow your marketing and sales teams to sell more and more quickly as an actual product feature. If it can tie into sales and marketing, that's important. Besides that, if for the long term, if basically you can say, hey, here are the companies that are going to be the most successful. Once we come out of this, here are the characteristics they have. That is another relevant part as well. So Jackson, does that make sense? I actually think there's more to message around cutting costs a smart way, but through systems, efficiency, technology. And then there are these other ways that are related to kind of innovation, which becomes an important message. And how do you innovate even in the current framework, but also marketing. And then the third point is kind of like assets. They accumulate assets at a faster rate.
Absolutely. And Juhi and the rest of the chat, if you have any follow-up questions or additional questions for Ben, please go ahead, drop them in the chat, drop them in the Q&A. We'll do our best to make sure that Ben answers them.
Okay, yep. And let me move on to number 2. And number 2, as we'll go through this fast, is talking about the second way that you can kind of, succeed in your marketing and actually grow even in a downturn is warming up cold leads. So these are cold leads that, have been, maybe potential customers, they've been prospects, they've been people who've been interested. A lot of times people are like neglecting them now. Number one, just because a lot of like sales teams and marketing teams are smaller in the current situation. But 2, these are all cold leads that could become warm. And at the minute, businesses maybe in your industry are doing more deals, then suddenly they become hot leads, right? So if you can warm them up now, you're setting up for like Q3 when maybe those become very hot leads as well. So here's a couple of points I want to mention. One is how many LinkedIn posts have you done in the past 30 days? And maybe Jackson, maybe I'll open up in the chat room and maybe you can just tell me, like, if you can just go to the chat room, how many LinkedIn posts have you done in 30 days, past 30 days? Like, are we talking like 5? I don't know. Some people 5. Are we talking 10? Are we talking like, oh, you're super ambitious, 20, 30? Like, how many LinkedIn posts? Okay, so I have one, like a 5 or 6. Jackson, are there kind of others?
Yeah, it looks like Simon did 10. So far, he's the leader. Juhi's done 5 or 6 to promote webinars. Simon,
Okay.
So what kind of content are you posting with those 10? And who else, kind of the rest of our chat, how many are you doing?
And as you're kind of typing about that, one of the things I'll sort of say is that, basically, if you are a B2B company and you're not posting on LinkedIn at least 10 times per day, that's a lot, right? And I don't actually just mean on your company channel, but I mean across all of your different like individual people, like all of the different like individual personal channels and company channels. So we're taking a little bit of a holistic view here. You're going to regret it. And the reason is, this is the golden age of LinkedIn. And it's a fantastic way to warm up cold leads. And the reason I call it the golden age of LinkedIn is that basically there's a life cycle of the social platforms where they're trying to build their audience and their reach. And they give you reach for free. Like, you just post something on LinkedIn, you're going to get a bunch of people to see it right away, whether you deserve it or not, right? Honestly, even now, whether it's good content or not. Now, good content that performs in the algorithm, they'll show it to more people. But even if you have bad content, they're going to show it to some people. And if you just post a whole bunch, they're going to show it to more people. So LinkedIn right now is like Instagram in 2016. It's like Facebook in 2014, where basically before those platforms were looking to fully monetize, they were giving you reach because they just want to encourage people to post. LinkedIn is like that now because it's sort of in this transition to become not just a professional network, but more of like a content platform. So, if you could go back and be like, yeah, knowing what you know now, like tackle Instagram in 2016, you would clean up, right? So one of the big advantages for companies right now is warm up cold leads, stay top of mind. And that's like the kind of the right now. This is kind of the slide that shows the difference. So you kind of need to ramp that up. And part of that is important is that right now you just don't know necessarily of all the leads you've had. It's the people who will do business right now. It's less determined by industry, less determined by even size of company. It's actually more determined by kind of psychological factors in the company. And whether some people, there are companies that are extremely defensive, right? Like, they're not going to do a single new business deal, no matter how good it is. There are other companies that are super aggressive, right? They're just going to do whatever because they see opportunity right now. They're like, let's be bold, let's be courageous. There's other companies that are going to pick and choose. And so you kind of need those latter two types you need to understand. And LinkedIn's a great way to stay top in mind on a whole bunch of them. And there's something that we actually do called a LinkedIn Inception program. And what this specifically is like, let's enter and this references the movie Inception, if you ever saw the movie with Leonardo DiCaprio. And it was kind of like this kind of sort of super meta movie where you're never quite sure what like reality is and sort of what's being implanted in the experience you're having. In this, it's less nefarious than that. What it just means is that let's be in the news feeds. You can do this with organic content, but you can also target a very small group of people, sometimes as few as 100 people on LinkedIn. Show those specific leads your content that is designed to warm them up. And you can do this for very efficient spend, because if it's like a pay-per-click model, it's a small number of leads. Yes, LinkedIn is expensive on a pay-per-click, but it's on a very small number. You can warm those up very quickly. So LinkedIn can help you in terms of creating lead awareness. It can project an enhanced image. It can support partnership deals. And so that's why, and the other sort of kicker right now in the current crisis is that you got a lot of people online, right? And what we've basically, some of our measurements are that 50% bigger audience than normal right now for online channels. So fantastic time to leverage LinkedIn, fantastic time to warm up closed leads. That's number two. And Jackson, did we ever get an answer to sort of like, what is the kind of content people are doing now?
Yeah, it looks like a lot of folks are looking to promote webinars. There's some
Okay, there you go. Okay.
there's some promotional graphics out there. Tamara, I think is very relatable. She says she's a lurker. She consumes a lot of content, but does spend a lot of time responding to other people's posts.
Okay, sure. I love that. Tamara, I guess you'd call that strategic lurking, right? Like
Right.
Lurking with a purpose.
I-
So sorry, go ahead, Jackson.
We have an interesting follow-up question here, and I think it's relevant, right? Is how do you stand out from all the LinkedIn noise, especially if you're like a techie B2B solution that might not have kind of a jazzy consumer edge?
Okay.
And he follows up with the point that as LinkedIn's getting used much more, there's a lot more noise, right? That might be harder to break through.
There is, but here's like, I got a simple formula for you. Like you can like write this down. And this is what, like, before you click post, this is what you look at. And the formula is simple plus surprising plus significant equals viral velocity. Okay, so simple plus surprising plus significant equals viral velocity. What that means is simple. One way you break through is it can't be difficult to understand what you're saying. If you say something brilliant, right? Like, and for instance, Jackson is very brilliant. But if Jackson says like, if A, then B, then C, then D, and post it on LinkedIn, it's just like, no matter how brilliant it is, it's like too complex for people to understand when you don't have their full attention. So one, simple, first way to break through the noise. Second way, surprising. So this becomes like a little bit of the challenge, but it's like, you've got to do something different than what everyone else is doing. So for instance, we did a webinar called Pivot, Don't Pause, and we released that at the time when everyone was saying pause, right? Everyone was saying like, okay, we're taking a slow down. We're actually saying, whoa, pivot, don't pause. And it was different because it was early on in this process when everyone was basically saying pause. So you got to do something like a little bit different. And then third, you've got to say something of deeper significance. So it's got to have some deeper purpose. So simple, surprising, significant. And then the other secret is that you just try a bunch of stuff. Here's the cool part about LinkedIn. You're not penalized. In fact, you have bigger audience reach the more you post. So try it 4 different ways, try it 8 different ways, try 12 different things. And you're like, ooh, that one somehow struck a chord. I'll give you one other tip for right now. Basically, everything has to be somehow related to the current situation to be relevant for people. So if you just go in and do like the post you could have done 6 months ago, very hard to make that perform well right now. It's got to like be that post, but then like apply to the current situation. So that sounds good, Jackson. Hopefully we answered that. Keep the questions coming. I'm going to jump in and try to get through more of the 7 so we get to all of it here. Number 3, become a category thought leader. And one of the fastest ways to establish your leadership, your thought leadership, is become a source of truth for data in your industry. I did a little bit of this in the last webinar on thought leadership that kind of talks about this process, but I want to go in a little bit more greater depth now. And this is actually fantastic to the prior question about how do you sort of stand out, like on LinkedIn. An interesting data-driven headline is a fantastic way. And our data-driven news process is one, leverage a timely news peg. You got a huge one right now with obviously coronavirus, but also there's like lots of mini news pegs that are happening, as different stats are released, as countries are opening, as there's second waves unfortunately happening. All of that are news pegs. You create some kind of just data study or insight related to that news peg. Data study is a little bit too ambitious a word. Study doesn't have to be like an elaborate thing. It can simply be pulling together some insights. Like I've been doing a bunch of stuff recently, just using Google Trends and looking at comparisons on Google Trends that are interesting, that are not huge data lifts, but that give interesting insights. 3, you post a study on your website. Why do you do that? Because you get inbound links, but also you can do other marketing tasks based off that, right? So someone visits your website, you hope they register, you hope they give them your email, but also you can also then cookie them at that point, and then you can retarget other ads against that, right? There's just things you can do once you get them into like your home turf. 4, you pitch that data story to mass media, but also on your online channels. 5, people link to that data study and you get inbound traffic, you get SEO from all the links as the benefit, and you're on your way. So here's kind of the process for that, is that 1, identify windows of opportunity. So you can kind of see this happening. So even in the current crisis, there are windows. So, what's happening? Well, hey, we're getting into in like kind of North America, like, summer season is coming. Countries are opening. People are considering travel again, maybe not travel international, maybe travel by car, not plane. That's a moment, right? Can you be relevant to that moment? Then what else is happening? Well, at some point we're going to have back to school coming up here. If you're in the kind of Northern Hemisphere, then it's going to be, August, September. That's not only a thing if you have kids or families, it's just a time to reset your habits, right? So what are the habits related to the new normal? What are the habits related to the new normal? If you've got a product that needs a change in behavior or involves a reset in habits, like that's another time. So look at these and identify these windows of opportunity. And some of those are drive periods, some of those are industry events, some of those are trends, but you leverage that. Second, then, you gather data for each time window. So we talked about how you can do that using number C there, digital data like Google Trends, Twitter, YouTube. Very easy to do interesting juxtapositions that people don't commonly do. For instance, here's an interesting one. Like, what's getting more coverage? President Trump's latest tweet or Prince Harry and Meghan Markle, right? That's an interesting thing. There are two things that don't go together. It talks about the relative focus in our culture of what we're focused on. And that's an interesting juxtaposition that actually can lead to an interesting insight which breaks through the noise, right? And that's just a random example, but little comparisons can do interesting things. Public data from government sources. So lots of people actually do this now and really like big reputable places. So, there are, entirely outlets like, for instance, Johns Hopkins University that is tracking, numbers of people infected by COVID-19. They're simply aggregating lots of different sources together. Kind of anyone can do that. So there's other ways to use public data. There's created data simple ways that we run for our clients, all kinds of surveys that are really simple, inexpensive, that you can run to have insights. Internal data, if you can package that up right now. So gathering data for each time window, really important and powerful right now. Brings us to number 3, or part C here, which is connect data to brand benefits. So as you do this, you get the ability to promote your product as a marketer, because you take each brand benefit and you connect it to a data point, right? So if your brand benefit is that to the sort of kind of scalable cloud platform example, if your brand benefit is that you're flexible, you're not tied into a structure, then your data concept might be actually a survey result or an interesting insight about the number of companies that wish they were more flexible. Why? Because your selling point is flexibility. Now you can add data that directly connects to it. So when people consume your content and they're like, oh, that's interesting about flexibility, one of our goals. What's the fastest way to achieve a more flexible infrastructure? Oh, it's to go to this platform, this company, right? So that's part C. And then part D is segment your data to fit each audience. 3 ways to segment. 1, geographic. Why? Because media is organized geographically. So if you have an interesting result for New York versus San Francisco versus Austin versus London, or it's maybe more regional, or maybe it's more country based. Like that's often very useful. Second is industry verticals. So if you have for like the sort of the you know, kind of the cloud infrastructure platform, if you kind of have platform as a service and you have it applied to healthcare, you know, fintech, education, other industries, that's super useful. Gets you more relevance. Really good for pitching trade media or influencers, or getting trade media influencer engagement on LinkedIn. Third, use cases. So maybe it's not industries, but it's a use case. For instance, HR is something that a lot of people do, human resources across a lot of different industries. So if you have something that like can target that, then you can take that as a use case, and that can be consumed by a lot of people across industries and different geographic segments. So the underlying point here is don't wait for news to happen. Use data to create the news. And just to recap where we're at here, we said one way that you can grow your business right now and in the current downturn is build credibility via social proof. Two, we talked about you can warm up cold leads. We highlighted LinkedIn. And three, we talked about becoming a category leader, and specifically that was through data. Let's go into number 4, which is unseat a tough competitor. And specifically, and this is a question, maybe for the group, how many of you are facing a bigger competitor? Maybe you can put in the chat and answer that. Like, are you the biggest? Like, are you the sort of like the big guy, the chief, the gorilla in the room, or are you like a smaller person trying to unseat a gorilla? Okay, and I see there's like a kind of Oracle. Okay, that's a big player, right? You're in a space with that. So this is a way that I want to talk about in a crisis time. It's an opportunity to unseat tough competitors and the big guys. Here is an awesome stat that if you're smaller and you got bigger competitors, that you'll find inspirational. And that is that in the past 4 recessions or financial downturns, 85% of the market leaders that entered that financial downturn as the market leader was not the market leader coming out of it. Only 15% retained their position. So great time to unseat a tough competitor. Question is, does your share of voice actually look like this? It's actually taken from an actual client deck we had where it's like us 4%, them 96%. And what share of voice just means is like the total conversation, how much are you in it? When we run this for clients, we'll be like, okay, here's all the media mentions for PR Hacker or clients. Here's all the media mentions, in the world about this topic over this period of time. How many were you in? Right? And then we'll say, okay, well, maybe all of those mentions weren't high quality. Let's look at the high quality ones. What % were you into those? And sometimes it comes out and starting out, you have very low share of voice. There's a second metric we actually do that is unique to us that I haven't seen anyone else do, which is called share of mind. What share of mind says is it's not just voice in terms of the overall public conversation, it's share of mind of the journalists and influencers who write about this, right? There might be like, 200 core people who write about your field. What % of them are aware of your company, aware of your brand, aware of your product, have a positive view, would actually consume and write stories about information about it. So share of mind is another one. So let me give you a technique that's really effective right now. It's always an effective technique, but especially right now on unseating a tough competitor. We call that the slingshot. What the slingshot says is that let's use the competitor's footprint to propel us forward. So let's look at the past 12 months of coverage. Let's say, Oracle and their specific offering had, who covered them, and let's convert that to media contacts. And then 2, let's set up ongoing real-time monitoring. So basically what this does is say, and maybe people in the webinar, maybe you've either written this like Slack message or email, or you've received it, which is, I just saw this roundup. How come our 4 other competitors were mentioned and we're not in there? What happened? How do we fix this, right? I don't know, like nod your head like quietly by yourself in quarantine if you've either received that note or you've sent that note, right? And hopefully we have some people nodding their heads, because I know I have both received and sent that note. And so related to that is this basically says, let's do the slingshot and let's leverage it. Hey, if our competitor got coverage, good for us. They've told us who will cover the type of information we can provide. So here's an example for, let's say, the kind of data visualization space, where we said, okay, Tableau was covered 8,000 plus times. This is from a kind of a past work for a client. Click was covered 2,500 times. Click data was covered 107 times. So this is 10,000 opportunities to actually be in their conversation. And remember, they're the big player. They're the one that gets covered all the time. Great. So then we go out and we do outreach to specifically the people covering them with that, again, that interesting data insight, that interesting approach to the current situation, that interesting insight. Suddenly everything we did in the prior steps actually is really relevant. And so there's a couple other ways to do this. Second one is called the Goliath. So the Goliath is all about leveraging big players. So in the case of the Oracle example, they're also a Goliath as well as a competitor, but sometimes it's not that. So for instance, maybe Apple is the Goliath, and you know that there's a new Apple product release coming out. If you're relevant to that, then you can leverage that news. And that's really powerful because a lot of these big Goliath companies, they have reporters that are dedicated to covering them. So if you're trying to get in the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal, you typically can't, there's other ways you can get in, but you can't go to the Apple, beat reporter at New York Times or Wall Street Journal. Why? Because they cover Apple. And if you're smaller, they're not covering you. So suddenly you have an insight related to Apple's new release that you can piggyback on. They'll cover you because they're covering Apple and you get to ride along with it. When you do that, suddenly there's more media outlets in play at top tier that you can leverage. Okay. Third one is the news jack, which is specifically keyword terms. So if there's other phrases, if there's other, and here, let me, it's kind of a little bit zoomed in here. I'll go back out, but if there's other phrases that are key topics for your industry, right? Like platform as a service. And if people are discovering platform as a service you want to know about, then you slingshot around that or you pitch that too. It's called the news jack, right? So competitor response, the slingshot. Related company response, the Goliath. The topical response, the news jack. Those are all things you can do to unseat a tough competitor. And again, opportunity right now, because more than 8 out of 10 are going to be are not going to have their pole position after all this is done. I'm going to hit the last kind of 3 points here as well. But Jackson, is there any other last questions that we have, or that I want to finish by the top of the hour? So I'll kind of power through these last 3 points.
I think we're good to go, Ben. No more questions in the chat. If anyone has any last minute questions, feel free to.
Okay, sounds good. So final kind of 3 things that are sort of opportunities to grow your business, even in a crisis. 5 is influence the influencers. And specifically, there's a small number of influencers, and I don't just mean like a blogger or a social media person. That's part of it, but it's also like the journalists themselves. And if you can focus on the power of scalable relationships right now, not all relationships are created equal. There is an opportunity right now to reach out to more folks for a couple of reasons. One, and develop relationships. One, a lot of people are online. They've got time on their hands, right? If you want to develop relationships. 2, people aren't doing in-person coffees. They're not doing lunch. I mean, if you had this sort of I want this great relationship and I'd wait till the next time I'm going to be in New York City to reach out to someone, no one's expecting that right now. So it's actually a great time to develop relationships. You can do that through Zoom. You can do that from wherever you are. And people are more open to let's have a Zoom chat, over water or a cup of coffee. Let's do that as well. So it's a great time to build scalable relationships. And we call this our relationship pipeline, where we want to actually go from someone who's a reporter to a receptor to an amplifier to a supporter to an advocate. And we actually track these as stages. So if you've ever done kind of sales work, and maybe you've used a platform like Salesforce, there's typically sales stages, right? Where you kind of okay, how does a lead become a customer? What we're saying is this is a great time to develop relationships, and you should actually track it like that. Let's track if people are receptive to what you're saying, if they're amplifying what you're saying, if they're supporting, if they're an advocate. And that doesn't happen overnight, but you can track this, and it's a great time for relationship building. One of the ways we do this, and this is related to, is that we do 360-degree activity tracking. So we might define a limited number of people that we want relationships with, or relationships for our clients. And we kind of do a little bit of the process, it sounded like, of Tamara. You said strategic lurking, or actually you said lurking, I added the strategic. So you can look at those kind of limited subset of people, and how do you add value to the conversation? This is an example we did for a client, for Lauren Good, who's a reporter, a journalist for Wired, about us commenting on stories about it. Eventually, acquiring her cell phone number so we can pitch via text message. Her asking for early access to ideas, and stories, wanting to publish ongoing brand news. And then she publishes our side of the story over competitors. And so this isn't about, trying to I don't know, a pessimistic way to look at this would be like trying to use someone to achieve your goal. This is actually about generating a genuine relationship with someone, adding value. So you notice it starts off, we're commenting on her story. We're trying to offer insights. We're trying to, provide data. And we're doing all of that, obviously in search of a goal, but before we get to benefit ourselves, we're trying to help her in this case, okay? So we believe in something called the top 40. And what the top 40 is here is looking at, we've tried let's focus on 10 relationships. We focus on 100, and 40 is just a number we like. You don't necessarily succeed in developing to advocate level all of your relationships. So 40 gives you enough in play, but it's not 100 where you can't focus. So we like doing kind of 40 at a time. And I see the question also here, and I sort of see the note about strategies revolve around targeting small subsections of people. Does this have a higher ROI? And what I would say is that we believe in think small to get big. It's not so much that you just only do small subsections, but no one pays attention to them. The big players don't pay attention. Why? Because they're small subsections. And if you're Oracle, you just look for the big guys, right? But the point is you pick off these smaller players, and it actually is very similar to a process that is in a book called Good to Great, which is talking about starting with niche audiences, and basically you get bigger and you eventually pick up larger players. So I think focusing on, it's not so much just small niches, but that adding value. And the way that you can add value is you focus on the needs of a specific group. That super makes sense. Brings us to kind of point number 6 here, which is bolster your brand reputation. One of the big things you can do right now, and this happens for a ton of startups, that let's say you launched with minimum viable product, like everyone says to do, right? So you launch with this first product, and everyone says the rule of thumb is if you need to be almost embarrassed about it in version 1.0, and then you're going to iterate, otherwise you'll be too slow. Well, the problem is, that's a good strategy for product development, but someone reviewed your version 1.0 product, and they went in some kind of forum, and they said, yeah, I tried this out, but you don't have 5 different features I need. It doesn't work for me. Problem is, what's happened is now a year or 2 has transpired. Now you have those 5 features, or you have 4 of the 5, and then this is sitting out there and it's incorrect. So what do? This is a great time to think about how much business do you lose from legacy reviews and comments that don't even reflect your current product. And what you can do is start this approach to, 1, respond to negative criticism. One of the things we do for our clients is we built some tools where we can look at 100,000 forums. What are they saying about your product? Let's correct negative criticism, not in a defensive way, by showing how things have changed. 2, let's enter competitor discussions. So let's look at, okay, maybe that competitor has a much bigger share of voice footprint than us, but let's start entering those. And 3, let's answer product questions. Let's add clarity to this. So this is a great time to bolster your brand reputation. And why? Because some of the bigger competitors had either agencies or people that were commenting in Quora. That is down right now. They are doing less. So this is an opportunity to create a new online footprint. And then finally, as we wrap up, let me jump over here to trigger prospects to buy now. And specifically, I know it's a challenge for a lot of companies right now. How do you trigger action? And one of the best ways to do that is giving ways that are relevant to what's going on and time sensitivity. And do it in such a way that, 1, if people are interested in being converted as a client, they can do it now. But 2, it sort of tees it up for when we come out of the crisis, they're going to be top of mind and ready to do this. Let me give you an example of what we did for Postmates. Postmates Challenge, we had a goal of let's get 1,000 new users to download the Postmates app and buy something in a single day. We can't buy ads. That was the challenge for this client. And so we came up with a National Eat What You Want Day offer. Why National Eat What You Want Day? Simply because we needed a time trigger, something that happens on a day to cause action. And the premise was, whatever your city wants to eat most, Postmates will buy and deliver for free. Why do we do that? For Postmates, cost of acquisition is expensive, a new customer. buying something that is probably an inexpensive item that they can deliver for free is a very inexpensive way to acquire a customer for Postmates. So they're happy to do this. So here are the viral triggers we had. Location trigger, it was local metro market. Time trigger, it was this national holiday, National Eat What You Want Day. Emotional trigger, it's like what you want to eat. So we had all of these viral triggers laddering to the same day. When we put that all together, here's what we were able to accomplish just with earned media on a PR basis. We had television news covering the story. So this is, on ABC Las Vegas or ABC Tampa. They're basically running that today is National Eat What You Want Day. Big Mac is the #1 most craved food, as it is in most cities, and Postmates is delivering it for free. This is running unpaid on the morning news, on the evening news, with a coupon code on how to do this, right? This is newspapers saying Postmates wants to give you a free Big Mac today. This is influencers saying like, hey, Chicago foodie sisters, today's the day to get a free Big Mac from Postmates. This is online viral outlets like Heavy saying there's a way to do this. So what happened is in this single day, 60 media outlets, 14 metro markets, 75 million impressions, really awesome positioning on the brand. And what happened in this single day was over 10,000 clicks to a landing page, 7,400 new app downloads. They delivered 6,000 Big Macs in a single day. And this was worth hundreds of thousands of dollars in new user acquisition without the cost, simply by doing this. So how can you create a situation where there's reasons to act now? You target those groups of individuals. You find those people that realize that, now is a time to actually move on the short term, but position yourself for the long term. And you drive it with a time-sensitive offer. And what you'll find is, even if people don't take that now, you'll be top of mind when people are in a different mindset and they are doing deals. So brings us to the final point. And just, how can PR and marketing scale growth in a crisis? Number one, you can build credibility via social proof. 2, you can warm up cold leads. 3, you can better explain your value proposition. 4, you can become a category thought leader. 5, you can unseat a tough competitor. 6, you can influence the influencers. 7, you can bolster your brand reputation. And then finally, you can trigger your prospects to buy now. And I threw in a bonus one for you in there as well. Jackson, any final questions or thoughts, or else I want to kind of end on the most important kind of final ending thought of the day.
Hey Ben, Justin here. Justin's having some connection issues, but it looks like that's it for our Q&A.
Okay,
Yeah.
fantastic. Well, thank you for jumping in, Justin, as a trusty producer does. One, if you have more questions or you're interested in more insights about this or how we would potentially work on something together as an agency, email me at ben.kaplan@prhacker.com. The second thing I always ask, which I love, and you can post this in a chat room, but I really love it on Twitter, is what is the one thing that you learn today that are going to implement? The one thing that sticks with you. Every time I go to these webinars, I actually think, what is that one thing? Because you get a lot of useful information, but you want to put it into action. And I'm curious on what is the sticky idea that resonates most with you. So those of you that were participating, what is the one thing? If you put in the chat room, that's great, but also just tweet at me at Benjamin Kaplan. And finally, here's a little experiment. Let's connect on LinkedIn. Talk about LinkedIn being an awesome platform for right now. Let's connect both ways. I would love to see your content. Hopefully, if this is useful to you, you'll just see some of mine. Here's what you can do. That's the actual LinkedIn URL for me. But you can also do this. If you want to do this as a little kind of hint on how to connect, you open your LinkedIn app. You basically click on that little part where they have the QR code there. And if you have 2 options. One is like scan a code or one is show your code. If you just do scan a code, you can scan your screen right now. I'll leave it on for a second. And that will connect you with LinkedIn right away. Or if you simply want to do linkedin.com/in/KaplanBen. Send me a request, put in that you were in my webinar. I'll accept the request, we'll connect, and then we can both be kind of in each other's LinkedIn network and celebrating each other's content. And again, LinkedIn is an amazing platform. So with that being said, thank you all for coming for the webinar. The final point I will leave you with is that with crisis marketing, there are actually amazing things you can do that actually work better in a downturn, that can speed things up. There are things that we mentioned today that normally take 3 years that you can do in 3 months. And so, so embrace that. Again, the 9% of companies that outperform everyone else out of a crisis, one of the 3 things that they invest in is marketing during a crisis, and that can do amazing things for you right now. So thank you all for coming. Please let me know any questions, and look forward in chatting with you more and catching you in the next webinar. Cheers. Thank you.